this project, you're actually going to recreate a famous work of art in miniature. I'm holding up some examples of my students from years past. And oftentimes people look at that and they say, oh, how could you draw so perfect on such a small surface? But there's all sorts of tricks to it. You're going to start with a special piece of paper called shrink film. If you've ever done shrinky dinks, it's the same stuff. And so it looks really shiny like this, and it'll be sized 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And then you're going to need a reproduction of a famous work of art. In art class, there will be all sorts of famous works of art in postcards to choose from. If you're working from home, there's a Google Docs file with some examples of famous works of art, or you could simply find your own example and make sure to print it to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. The first thing you need to do to your shrink film is prepare the surface so that you can draw on it. Right now it is too smooth to draw on with pencil. So I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper and I'm going to rough it up. I tend to do little round circles, but whatever works. It'll go from looking pretty see-through to when you rough it up, it'll look cloudier. After you do that, here comes one of the secrets of the project. You're actually going to be allowed to trace the big shapes so that you can replicate the masterpiece in miniature form. So I'm going to go ahead and take my postcard, my famous work of art postcard, and I'm going to place my shrink film on top of it. If they're not exactly the same, just center your shrink film over the most important part of your project. And then I like to take a piece of tape. I'm just going to use a little piece of washi tape here. And I just tape it at the top so that I can still lift my shrink film if I want to see the artwork beneath. So I put a little piece of tape on top like that, and then I usually fold it over. And now it's sort of like a hinge. So if I want to lift and see the full color version of my famous work of art, I can still lift it. But if I want to trace it and know exactly where things belong, I can leave my shrink film over top. Some kids like to work with their picture next to it, and that's okay too. So what I will do is I'll take just a regular pencil and I'm going to trace over the big shapes, the things that are important. Now this Frida Kahlo picture is very detailed, so I'm not going to trace the entire thing on video. When you're done tracing the big shapes, they'll look something like this. Now this one I already started to color as well, but just so you can see, I have to put a piece of white paper beneath it, that I traced all the big shapes so that if I were to have my resource image next to it, I still know which parts are what color. I like to work with it right on top because when I do that, then if there's a value change that is subtle, like from a light green to a dark green, I can see exactly where that takes place and reproduce it exactly. The next step of the project would be to use colored pencils to add color to your shrink film. You want to reproduce the colors in the original picture so that we're reproducing the masterpiece. With colored pencil, you want to work in layers from light to dark. So I'll start with some of my lighter colors first. I do a small scumbling technique with my colored pencil, and then I will build my values going from light to dark. So in this area on this leaf, there is a lighter green, and then there's a shadow. And so I'm just going to layer the colors and do some blending of greens. I don't want to see the direction I'm coloring in, so I'm going in small, little controlled scribbles, or what we call scumbling. When it's done, it will look pretty close to the original. There are a few teeny tiny details I may have omitted, but that's okay because it's going to shrink down even more and no one will notice. My shrink film is ready for the oven. I've placed it on a baking sheet with a piece of parchment paper to protect my pan. And I've preheated my oven to 300 degrees. I'm going to place it in my oven, and you would want to do this with help from an adult. And I'm gonna place it in my oven, and normally I would close my oven, but I'm trying to videotape the process for you. So I'm going to keep my oven a little bit open and see if it will start to work its magic. It appears to have shrunk all the way down, so I'm gonna safely take it out of the oven with an oven mitt. And there you go. There is my shrunken mini masterpiece.